Hey guys, this is Snap. Today we're going to be going over the what happened with items post and the elusive quadruple down. Just kind of want to get my overarching thoughts out here in a video, just kind of going over their main philosophies and why maybe the reality in the game is different than what they want based off of their stated philosophies here in their manifesto. First things first, I think we should all be really appreciative. This post is somewhat taking accountability for where they went wrong. It takes a lot to do. It's definitely something we should be encouraging if we want to see better developer player communication in the future. Now, let's go over GGG's 3 stated philosophies here and really dig into what they're trying to do with these changes and why the new system they have set up here is the complete opposite of what they're trying to achieve and is completely antithetical to what POE has always been about in the past and goes against their design goals they've stated here. The first philosophy here that they state is that reward mechanisms should scale properly with item quantity and rarity. Chris states that they use what they call item templates to control drops from league content. This is where you kill a monster and you drop a flat reward, aka 4 jewels or 1 currency item, 2 currency items, you name it. It's a flat reward that doesn't scale no matter how much item quantity or rarity you have on your player or the amount of players you have in your party. They say here that Path of Exile is a game about opting into more difficulty in exchange for more rewards. That has historically always been the case. You are rewarded exponentially for investing more and more into your map, whether that's through sextants or alchemy orbs or scarab. There's tons of juicing mechanisms here that you can use to invest more and get exponentially more reward. They correctly state here that item templates ignored quantity and rarity bonuses. They then state that from now on they want rewards to scale with item quantity and rarity bonuses, and that's why the new Arch Nemesis mods are so powerful. It's because if you have the right conditions where you add a bunch of quant and rarity to the rare mob through mechanics like expedition, where they're inheriting a bunch of quant and rarity depending on where they're placed in the expedition, and then also if you have a bunch of quant and rarity on a specific character, which is a color, you can get crazy loot explosions where 30, 40, 50 divines are showing up. Now, there are 2 immediate problems here we need to point out with this system. The first problem is that while reward mechanisms should scale with item quantity and rarity, the reality is no mechanics right now scale with item quantity and rarity in game besides specifically Arch Nemesis monsters, and the only Arch Nemesis monster that you care about is literally Solaris Touch because it's pure currency. To be honest, nobody really cares about any of the other rewards. They're just honestly garbage. Nobody cares about 20 magic flash dropping on the ground or 100 whetstones. These rewards are honestly worthless. There's only one single mob right now that's worth looking for, and that's Solaris Touched. Additionally, all league mechanics in the game right now that previously used to scale off of item quantity and rarity have been all but removed. If they want league mechanics to be rewarding with item quantity and rarity, then why league mechanics like Expedition or Legion don't scale at all with the number of party members or the amount of item quantity and rarity you have on your gear? The change that they made here is really ironic because they want reward mechanisms to scale properly with item quantity and rarity, but the changes that they've done have effectively pigeonholed people into engaging only with mechanics that have the flat loot, because the mechanics before that previously existed that rewarded players for engaging with quantity and rarity multipliers has just been removed. And the only thing that they've done to compensate here is a single Arch Nemesis modifier that drops you a shit ton of divines whenever you find the loot goblin. It leads to really degenerate gameplay where your strategies in game right now involve how many rare monsters can I spawn to get the most amount of chances at a loot goblin, because none of the other league mechanics are worth engaging in. Now, it's important to note why they're doing this change in the first place, and the post gives a couple hints as to why these changes even occurred in the first place. Basically, they had an idea for Arch Nemesis. They wanted rare mobs to be engaged. They wanted to have rare monsters have combinations of rare mods that dropped various forms of loot when you're killing them. In theory, it sounds good. You get engaging rare fights, and then also you're rewarded for engaging with monsters with higher HP. They took this idea, tested it internally, and I'm sure they found a couple problems immediately. If you want the average player to encounter a rare and have a chance of dropping a divine when you reach a Solaris Touch mob, when that mob exists on a league mechanic, like in Alva or in Breach or Abyss, the base quantity of that mob is so high, and I'm sure what they found internally in testing is that they were spawning these mobs in these league mechanics and then hundreds of divines were dropping because it wasn't properly scaled, and this stuff was multiplying together to give the mob way too much base quantity and rarity. On top of that, mechanics like Beyond, Abyss, and Breach are probably spawning way too many rares to begin with. So when they're trying to shoehorn this change in where they want to make rares engaging, they couldn't reconcile the problems that existed with with mechanics like Breach, Abyss, Beyond, and Delirium because the multipliers were just getting way too high. You can probably imagine what the current arch nemesis Solaris Touch mod would have been in a previously juiced map and why that would be so problematic. But it's so strange to me that they are sacrificing all of the previously used juicing mechanics players had available to them just to shoehorn a change in where they want rare mobs to be dropping stuff. Plenty of other avenues they can take, like making these bonuses additive with the rare mobs, but that would probably require a lot more work internally to be done. The really unfortunate thing here is that GGG really still hasn't addressed the issue here. The main issue here that everybody has is that they've reduced loot coming from league mechanics that people used to engage in and moved them onto rares. Reducing loot everywhere else and moving it specifically onto rares does not feel good. Additionally, when they make a statement like this that people are playing Breach or seeing a reduction in currency items of 7%, just illustrates a complete lack of knowledge of how multipliers even work in PoE or how people engage with league mechanics in the first place. The only way that this could possibly be true is if the player they're referring to doesn't even alch or put deli orbs or literally anything on their map. While I do think a lot of people might be overstating the amount that this affects them, anybody that is engaging with these league mechanics and is familiar of how they worked in the past can night and day see a difference. Not even for just parties, but solo players as well. There is a fixation on this post that is referring to parties and why they think they needed to nerf these kinds of things, and they just keep pointing to parties and why it's problematic. However, once again, the entire player base and all of the relevant league mechanics don't need to suffer because parties exist. You have tuning knobs at your disposal if you want to reduce the amount of items that party players are generating. Pointing at the bottom of this post that people are able to drop 50 divine orbs for a single monster like loot is working fine is honestly frankly insulting. Your entire player base is telling you how horrible loot feels overall in an average map. Yet you point to the fact that just because it's possible to drop 50 divine orbs or groups are making multiple mirrors per day, like there isn't an issue. It's completely missing the point, and honestly I find this like really tone deaf. If you play enough Path of Exile, you can make multiple mirrors per day looting heist contracts. And the kicker here is that they state, we think the drops are in a pretty good place after this week's changes, and the only thing I can think to myself is the beatings will continue until morale improves. They state here if the reward gap was any larger for these league mechanics, it would be less efficient to kill regular monsters, and a player should spend all of their time focusing on repeating a small subset of content. Yet the changes they've implemented here has done the exact opposite. People are only engaging with the league mechanics in their map that drop loot tiles, which is the exact opposite of what they wanted to achieve here. If they don't want people repeating a small subset of content, then why are so many people just running Legions over and over, or running Heist over and over, or running Expedition over and over? Those are literally the only things that'll make you money right now in Trade League. It's just so backwards. The philosophies here are good. The philosophies are sound. However, the implementation that they've done here is causing the exact opposite thing to happen. And I feel like they don't understand why. Reward mechanisms should scale with quantity and rarity and in a party. Why don't Expedition encounters scale with the quantity and rarity on your gear? Why don't Legion splinters scale with the amount of quant and rarity on your gear or the amount of players in your party? Why don't Heist Strong boxes give you more contracts or rogue markers for how many people are in the party or your quant and rarity on gear? Why don't multiple people get a shop in a Ritual League window, or at least give more tribute at the end? There are so many mechanics and maps that fail to meet this philosophy, where the item quantity and rarity you have on your character doesn't do anything to interact with the game, and the only mechanics that did interact with item quantity and rarity have literally been effectively removed. The philosophy here is sound, the implementation and the reality is the complete opposite. Philosophy 2 is that we should fight fewer rare monsters, but they should be more challenging and rewarding. And the reality is we're just almost ignoring rare monsters, especially if we can't kill them. We're walking away from them, and now we're just fishing for a singular rare monster with one specific mod that has a good currency conversion. We aren't incentivized to kill them. We're incentivized to fish for them. The third philosophy is that there shouldn't be a large gap in difficulty and rewards of league content and base game content. And while this philosophy might be sound, when they removed historic quantity and rarity bonuses on league mechanics, they did nothing to compensate, besides a meager like 20 to 30% buff that drops. This nowhere near bridges the gap that existed before. If they want to remove crazy multipliers on the league mechanics, they need to do more to the base drops to make it worth running. Because right now, killing monsters in PoE is not rewarding. Loot tiles are rewarding. Monsters are not rewarding right now. And just because you saw a clip on Reddit of some group dropping 50 divine orbs doesn't mean the problem is solved. It just actually blows my mind. You want some specific suggestions of what they can do to improve the problem that currently exists? The first one is that league mechanics should scale based off of player quantity and rarity as well as quantity on your gear. It makes no sense that Expedition, Legion do not scale with this at all. If they want to keep a smaller gap between base monsters and league mechanic monsters, they need to find a happy middle ground with what existed before and what exists now. It is way out of whack. The previous bonus to Alva or whatever was 10,000% rarity, then start cutting it down until it gets a little more in line with what exists in the base game. The answer isn't going from a 10,000% multiplier, which you've chosen to be balanced, down to a 200 to 300% increase. And acting like removing all of these from league mechanics and then stating that people are only seeing a 7% reduction in drops in their Alkin Go map doesn't quite begin to grasp the situation and frankly ignores reality in which how people actually play the game. And this section here where they pretend like the average player is unaffected, you just start questioning the context in which they're making these statements. What is the average player? Is the average player somebody who's just literally alking their map and doing nothing else? Is the average player somebody who doesn't kill Brutus and logs out? The average player somebody who gets to wipe maps and quits? We don't have any context of what kind of player they're referring to when they make these statements, so these are honestly just kind of all worthless. Yeah, one last thing I want to mention here. Balor made a video on specifically how rarity and quantity multipliers on items work, so you can kind of get a good grasp on how these multipliers are working before and why they're so drastically different now. So if you've ever engaged with any of these league mechanics and you want to know why so much loot was dropping, I'll leave a link to his video down in the description here so you can kind of get a grasp on how these things are working internally, just so you can kind of get a better idea, be more informed about, how loot is dropping in POE and why the new system is creating bad incentives for players and limiting design space for rares, but not only juicing content in the future. I think that about sums it up, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your day.